Well, welcome everybody to our LinkedIn Live session. This is an expanded version of what we did in our UPRT Summit on 16 November. And what APS has decided to do is each of those sessions, which were true experts in the domain of aviation training and upset recovery, are coming back for an expanded session. And I welcome Captain Danny Hall with me here today with United Airlines, who was our keynote speaker just a few weeks ago. Welcome, Danny. Great to have you here.
Hey, BJ. Thanks for inviting me back.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So I think one of the things that we found in the event, Danny, was that, we only had a couple minutes for questions at the end of the period. And I know that there was a lot of questions that came in online. And so today we're hoping that, the attendees here have the opportunity of being able to pose more questions to us. So we're excited to see that. So I think before we get started is if you're watching the event today, please, especially you can do it in LinkedIn, you can do it in YouTube, you can do it in Facebook or Twitter. You can submit a question and it's going to come through to me here in the control panel that I'll be able to add into the event. But please articulate those questions and get them in early, and we're going to be able to get to those in a few minutes. So what the plan is today is I'm going to actually run the recording of Danny's fantastic keynote presentation that he did a couple of weeks ago. And it's going to run for about 25 minutes or so. And you're going to see where Danny's at on his philosophy when it comes to upset training. And the title of his presentation was Tomorrow's Professional Pilots Require Upset Training Fluency. And that's exactly what he addresses in his talk. So before we run the video, Danny, then go to our extended Q&A together. Is there anything you want to add before we get started to the folks out there that are going to watch the recording?
No, I appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for joining in. This is a passion of mine. Obviously, it's passion for a BJ. And so we're excited to chat with you guys a little bit later. Looking forward to Q&A.
Absolutely. And so just a reminder, even though you're going to watch a recording that's playing, we are coming back for a good 30 minutes of Q&A. So please articulate those questions, get them into the channel. And we're going to go ahead and play that recording right now, but Danny's going to be here. And when we get done, he and I are going to chat, and please get those questions in. So I'm excited about that. So you all set, Danny?
Yes, sir. Thanks, BJ.
All right, here we go. Let's watch that recording. I have the honor and privilege of introducing our keynote speaker today, Captain Danny Hall with United Airlines. Danny's current position is Senior Manager, Aviate Training Development and Support. The title of his keynote today is Tomorrow's Professional Pilots Require Upset Training Fluency. Let me talk a little bit about Danny to demonstrate his immense experience and background that make him the perfect keynote speaker for the event today. Danny has a Bachelor of Science in Aerospace Science from Metropolitan State University, a Master of Science in Aviation Management from Purdue University, and his military education includes Air Command and Staff College and Squadron Officer School. Danny is now in his 23rd year serving in the Air National Guard with over 2,500 hours, of which 2,000 of those hours are in the F-16. In the Air National Guard, Danny has held numerous positions in training, standardization, and weapons. Before joining United Airlines and while serving in the National Guard, Danny flew for Great Lakes Airlines, Mosier Aviation, and JetBlue Airways. Danny joined United Airlines in 2014, where he is now a captain on the 737 with over 4,000 hours on type. As a flight instructor, he held the positions of Boeing 737 Quality Control Coordinator, 737 MAX Return to Service Subject Matter Expert, Training Center Evaluator, and Part 142 Certificate Manager. After his role as instructor, he transitioned to manager flight training for the Boeing 737 and United Airlines Contract Training Center Certificate Manager. And he was the team lead to develop training and standardization content for the very impressive and really world-leading academy, United Aviate Academy. Danny spends his free time with his wife traveling, hiking, running, skiing, and flying gliders. And just last week, they welcomed a brand new, beautiful baby boy to their family. Over the past year, working together with Danny to develop training solutions with the United Aviate Academy, he's demonstrated himself to be an expert leader and a true technical expert, and I consider him a close friend. Danny, with that, over to you, sir.
Hey, BJ. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for letting me kick off this year's Safety Summit. I want to commend you and your team on your efforts and laser focus on safety. And to all of you watching out there and or watching after the summit, thank you for taking the time to listen and participate in this year's Safety Summit. Before I go on, I want to establish a few ground rules. Standard pilot, right? First and foremost, I'm very passionate about aviation, and sometimes that comes out in many diatribes. So thanks for humoring me, on my diatribes. Second, I can't promise that I won't bore you half to death. However, I'll try to keep it faster or funnier. And lastly, I'm not going to say anything that's too fancy or cosmic. In fact, my goal is to harp on aviation core competencies with a little twist. Those core competencies, I think, are extremely valuable as we look a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road in our current aviation, the current aviation industry and the challenges that we foresee. Those core competencies are safety, quality, and back to basics. I told you, they're not going to be cosmic. Let's start this off with safety. And I want to first and foremost say that this isn't going to be your mother or father's safety talk. In fact, I'm going to assume that by the mere fact that you are tuning in to today, you are well-versed in safety and all of the buzzwords associated with safety in aviation. What I do want to discuss, and can't wait for the follow-on questions and the collaboration, is I want to discuss making safety cool. And what I mean by that is traditionally, we've treated safety through PowerPoints at the beginning of your aviation career, through graphs and charts and numbers, through posters up on a wall, through recurrent training, you get a little safety blurb, and then every week or every month, you get a safety email. However, that's not cutting it. And the data suggests that we don't have full buy-in from our pilots. One of the ways I think that we can get as close to full buy-in as possible is making safety cool. And that's a sweet buzzword, and I get it. But what I mean by making safety cool is let's put a twist on safety from the very beginning. Let's make sure that safety is integrated throughout our pilot ecosystem. I'm not saying completely replace all of the PowerPoints and the posters and the charts and the graphs and the data. That is important, especially for pilots. We have to be able to speak to all demographics. However, let's intertwine safety from the very beginning. From BI, we have the safety discussions, the educational PowerPoint briefs on safety. But then throughout basic NDOC, let's incorporate safety and bring up how effective safety is when we're all working together. And we think about safety throughout our training, big or small. That'll dovetail nicely and transition nicely into qualification training. Qualification, there's a lot of opportunity to discuss safety and qualification training that maybe we think right now we don't have time for, but we do have time for it. We do have time to show while we're in qual training where there were some safety of flight issues. What happens if we do encounter safety of flight issues? And let's make that part of our debrief is a discussion on safety. And then lastly, through recurrent training, let's incorporate not just a standard safety brief. Let's talk about where we're going with safety. Let's talk about how each individual can improve in safety. Same thing with academies and pilot training. Safety is in everything that we do, and it's a core fundamental of a flight academy. It's also a core fundamental of a student pilot's training. So let's make it fun. Let's make it cool. All right. And I'll end with this. Years ago, 20, 30 years, basic NDOC was tedious. It was boring, right? We were talking about HR related issues, meaning your health benefits, travel benefits, the FOM, Flight Operations Manual is what we call it at United. That was boring. Years ago at United, we looked at basic NDOC and said, let's make this cool. So I challenged the industry that if we can make basic MDOT cool, we can make our number one core competency in the aviation industry, which is safety, we can make that cool as well. And hopefully, I guarantee you throughout the Safety Summit, there will be a lot of specifics there, in addition to what I said, and a lot of cool things that some companies are coming up with to include dynamic or phased-based ORM tools that really, truly bring in the pilots. I'm sure we're going to talk about that, and if not, love to talk about it during the Q&A. But again, let's make safety cool. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The second topic is quality. And I'm a little concerned, I'm nervous about the current challenges in the aviation industry and what that's going to do to the quality of our training programs. Right now, the challenge is we're all the operators, the industry is competing for the same pilot group. And then we're also looking forward to understanding that we're going to need more pilots, and we need to produce pilots at a record pace. Sometimes that need for efficient pilot training is at the expense of quality pilot training. We've all heard the term, the pilot factories of the world. I do not want the aviation industry to turn into a pilot factory. I think that we need to focus our efforts on a quality program. And I'll take it up a notch and say that if you have a quality program, it can be just as efficient, if not more efficient, than a pilot factory program. So what do I mean by quality pilot training program? Well, first and foremost, we need to ensure that quality training is in our pilot training. I think it's broken down into three phases of the training: quality syllabus, quality instructor training, and then a quality assurance program, quality assurance program. Allow myself to say quality twice in one sentence. First and foremost, I think that a syllabus, you need to put a lot of thought into a syllabus. Depending on what you're trying to train, the academy level or a flight academy level, qualification course at an airline, or somewhere in between, there is not a cookie cutter approach to a syllabus. I think each operator needs to look at the syllabus and doing what's right for the student. Making sure that it is flexible enough to, if the student is not learning effectively, to go back and retrain or focus in a different area to better suit that pilot, and truly create that adult learning centric program. So one of the ways, at least I'm a little biased, but I'll harp on what we're doing down at United Aviate Academy when it comes to our syllabus. First and foremost, our syllabus is military style training. Our students truly buckle down, eat, sleep, breathe, and focus on flying while they're down in Goodyear at the United Aviate Academy. It's a structured 141 program. We take the bare minimum 141 structure and the TCO, and we have Unitedized it. We have harmonized our SOPs with Big Mother United so that the quality of training that the student is receiving from day one is that of United, and it's the exact same BI, CRM, TEM, call-outs, procedures, etc., that they will have when they get to United. We also have a robust quality assurance program that takes the feedback that we're receiving from the students and instructors and feeds it back into the program so that we can fine-tune the program to make sure that it is quality. It's what we expect at United. It continues to be industry leading, and it's focused on what the students need. The second part of ensuring a quality program is instructor training. I don't think I need to really go into the specifics of why we need instructor training with this group. I will just share a quick background or example to support the instructor training, the quality instructor training theory. And that is, a couple of weeks ago, I was down at Randolph Air Force Base, I had the honor and privilege to speak with and receive a few briefings from the Pilot Training Next detachment down at Randolph. And throughout their brief, they were very good about disclosing their lessons learned from their 3 to 5 years of building up this Pilot Training Next program that has a lot of great initiatives and some very cool things that we could talk about later, and hopefully that we adopt, as an industry. One of those, the number one lesson learned that the Air Force passed on to us was the fundamental requirement for quality instructors. And that started with quality instructor training. You have to ensure that our instructors are properly trained, they are standardized, and they understand their purpose. I think that we all understand that as instructors at the lower level at the academy, your goal is to get flight time. We need to make sure that instructors understand that they're instructors, that they're there for the student first. And we need to make sure that they understand their purpose. And I think that comes through properly setting proper expectations, and properly trained instructors, standardized training, and increased communication. All right, last but not least, under the quality paragraph is a quality assurance program. Think an ability to adequately evaluate, observe your program to make sure that it's meeting the needs of your pilot and your organization. But then also take that data, take that observation, and be able to feed it back into the pilot training machine so that you can now reap the benefits of those observations or those efficiencies, that feedback throughout your program. And again, beefing up the quality of your syllabus and of your program. To include, and I'll end on this, to include the QA program needs to look at the instructor training program and also QC and quality check the instructors. And I truly do believe that through quality training and standardization, you can replace less flight time and experience through the old adage of you can teach experience. And that teaching of experience comes through your quality instructors, your syllabus that is above and beyond the minimums that's been thought through, and it prepares the student correctly, and then your QA program that takes the feedback and creates that feedback loop. The third thing that I want to talk to before I hopefully tie all this into upset training fluency is I encourage the industry and encourage everyone to go back to the basics. Again, this is a topic that I don't think I really need to harp on the whys with this group, but if we don't have fundamentally sound pilots entering our industry, then we as an industry are not fundamentally sound. I think we can all agree throughout our phases of training and our career that if you aren't a fundamentally sound pilot, regardless of all the automation, regardless of the SOPs, regardless of the experience level of who you were flying with, there was a real safety issue. There were problems, right? Because I think we all know that when the automation fails, or when your flying partner isn't up to the task that day, or just something happens, most of the time you have to rely on your basic piloting skills. At the United Aviate Academy, one of the questions from the instructors, the check airmen down at the academy, the chief of standardization, the chief pilot, they always ask, hey, Danny, how do we harmonize with United? How do we instill CRM, TEM basics with a private pilot student when they can't even land? And I said, that's simple. We prioritize the basics first. We want to create sound pilots first. That's our focus, depending on their phase. Private pilot, instrument. We want to create sound, fundamentally sound pilots. Once we get into the commercial phase and we start to throw in some different scenarios, some commercial style scenarios, hopefully they have the fundamentals established to where we can build on their basics, their flying aptitude. One quick back to the basics story. As I was showing up in theater to one of my first deployments to Afghanistan, the outgoing squadron always briefs the incoming squadron on lessons learned. And I'll never forget that the outgoing squadron briefed us their number one lesson learned, which was don't forget the basics. All of their issues actually stemmed from the pilot getting enamored with the Gucci new technology and forgetting basic fundamental principles, switchology, communication, certain steps in the combat chain. And almost zero of the lessons learned were tied to the technology, or what we call the Gucci, like I said earlier, the Gucci stuff that we can do with the jet. And again, that ties to me. I think about that constantly when I see an organization or a person trying to get too enamored with the technology. I could see our industry and our academies getting too enamored with trying to create airline pilots with too much technology or too much reliance on the Gucci stuff and not focusing first on the basics and ensuring that pilot falls back and understands on the basics. All right. So of safety, quality, and back to the basics. I told you I wasn't going to say anything new or cosmic, just a little twist on those. How does making safety cool, quality training, and back to the basics tie into upset training fluency? Well, I believe that upset training encompasses all three topics through the comprehensive and dynamic environment that provides our pilots with an enormous value for not only themselves, but their follow-on operators. At the United Aviate Academy, we have incorporated upset training in the syllabus down at Goodyear after their instrument check ride, but before their commercial check ride, because we feel that it is the right thing to do. It is, again, back to that quality piece where it is it's not just the bare minimums. It adds to the footprint, but it creates enormous value for the pilot and follow-on operators. We've implemented UPRT down at UAA, like I said, after their instrument check ride, but before their commercial check ride. And we work through APS. Right now they go out to APS's headquarters. They go through 6+ hours of ground school. They have a 3-ride on aircraft training. And they finish it off with a capstone sim. I mean, let's just think about that for a second. Think about when we were all training and we were in our commercial phase. If somebody said to us, hey, pause, go off and take this world-class, industry-leading, the gold standard training and go through that type of training, what do you think it would do for you? Well, I think we can agree that it would make you a very safe pilot. By safe, meaning it addresses the leading cause of aviation fatalities, not just in North America, but worldwide, and brings it to focus through advanced ground school, right? On aircraft training, where it's not just a simulator, they're in the aircraft. They have air under them. They are seeing, smelling, feeling flying in all types of environment, all types of phases, in the envelope. And then they go into the sim. And now with those fundamental skills and that knowledge base, they top it off with a capstone sim. Think about if we had that, or if you had that during your training, how much better you would just be as a pilot, educated in flying skills, right? Not only that, you add in the decision-making skills that upset prevention and recovery training gives you, the hand flying skills, the confidence. That is just all an enormous value. And that speaks to the quality of the training. And one that I think safety and quality are paramount, right? And it's something that that is embedded in upset prevention and recovery training. I think that in and of itself is a huge argument and the basis for why we need to increase the awareness and the requirements for upset prevention training moving forward. When we talk about safety programs, quality training, and training that focuses on back to the basics, I encourage and dare I say challenge national aviation authorities to recognize quality training that is proactive and demonstrates risk mitigation of loss of control in flight, like upset prevention training, through increased credits towards certain pilot milestones, such as the 1,500-hour rule, ATP, CTP, etc. Again, based off of a quality training program. I hit on making safety cool, ensuring quality, and then all of us need to go back to the basics, and why I believe why upset prevention and recovery training truly capitalizes and is the epitome of those three competencies. I thank you all for your time. I hope my first rule, which was I won't make it too boring. I think it was my second rule. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. It was faster or funnier. I appreciate everybody's time. And I also, again, want to emphasize my thanks to BJ and his team, and also to everybody watching. I look forward to more dialogue, collaboration throughout this summit, and also follow-on collaboration as we continue to chat and talk about how we mitigate the threats and the challenges moving forward. So again, thanks for letting me kick this off, BJ. And now back to you for questions.
Well, Danny, that was great. I took lots of notes again on what you shared with the event today and in your summit a couple of weeks ago. And so you covered a lot of territory there. And I always like to start with perhaps now having listened to yourself, and I'm sure that you found yourself interesting to listen to. Is there anything that you'd like to maybe add or comment on after you've had a couple of weeks to think about that particular discussion that you presented, which I thought was fantastic with the three topics you focused on?
Well, I appreciate that, BJ. You're always your worst critique, right? However, for me, I keep going back to, we just need to concentrate on the basics. I mean, again, like I started off my presentation a couple of weeks ago, nothing I said was cosmic. I don't think I introduced anything new or too fancy. If we as an industry concentrate on safety, quality, right, and back to the basics, we'll continue to be the industry leading, they're the safest mode of transportation in the world and leaders in our industry. And I want to focus on that. There's plenty of people, plenty of different companies that are trying to be cosmic, and that's great. But again, our focus, especially at United, is to try to be the safest first and foremost, and then we go from there.
Well, I think you said a lot of things that are very powerful. And I was going to tell you before we started about an experience I had this week of some challenges the industry is facing, in particular in the corporate executive area when it comes to safety management system principles, checklists, quality, it really is becoming an area of great concern. And I don't want to necessarily dive into that today, but I think the point is that certainly the industry is seeing a different type of experience with new pilots coming into the inventory. And not all flight schools like United Aviate Academy is approaching it the way you are, where you're looking at creating the very best possible pilot you can in the time available to directly serve the airline. And I think what United Airlines is doing by really harmonizing United Aviate Academy with United Airlines when it comes to standardization, your callouts, your CRM process, your checklist, even your UPRT strategy is aligned with the airline, I think is very, very powerful. So, again, I congratulate you and United Airlines, United Aviate Academy on that. I truly believe, having worked with you now for, it's been about a year now, is that you guys are doing it for the right reason, which is about producing the very best, safest pilots that are going to feed into your airline, not to just keep it the way it is, but to improve it as well as we go forward. Instead of playing catch up, you're being progressive. And I think really attacking the industry challenge in a way that I would believe that other, training centers and organizations would benefit from. Do you feel that as well, Danny? Do you feel like you're on the track to maybe not solving, but have the solution underway to this threat coming of the low experience and perhaps a deficiency in overall high safety?
Yeah, I mean, first, I appreciate that. Thanks for recognizing that. I mean, that's what you're seeing is, it's a team effort. It starts with, Big Mother United. There's a huge team that built up the United Aviate Academy. And, I got to give credit to my bosses at United that they had a vision, right? It's not just a pilot factory down at UAA. The objective is to create the world's safest pilots that fly for United Airlines. So when you work objective backwards, right? Old fighter days, when you work target backwards, it's much easier than to build the footprint, to build that training footprint from start to finish. And that's what you're seeing down at UAA is we're not looking for numbers. We don't need to just pump out 500 pilots a year. We want the safest, most highly trained pilots pumping out of UAA every single year. And so with that in mind, then United and through United Aviate Academy leadership, we were able to say, okay, how do we make that happen? And that's what you're seeing. I do think that it's a challenge for a lot of different academies, for a lot of different companies, right? I mean, that takes a lot of time, money, energy, but it's worth it, right? Especially as we move forward, because this isn't going away. This challenge is something that we, as you're seeing right now, we're talking about, we're addressing, but we need to continually evaluate where we're at with this challenge, because pilots don't just become safe overnight, right? The experience level, we're not bridging the gap effectively if we're not always evaluating, bridging that experience gap that we're seeing. I mean, United Airlines alone, prior to COVID, the average pilot at United was hired with 3,500 hours. Now, post-COVID, and given the current challenge that we're seeing, that's reduced. That time is reduced. And that's not a United problem. That's an industry problem. That's a worldwide problem. And so when you just look at the facts and you look at the basics, like you mentioned, we got to be able to bridge that gap. And it's all about working target backwards, working the objectives of the safe and quality pilots.
And I completely agree. And I think the thing that you said that's kind of between the lines, or maybe you just outright said it, was that when you designed the program at United Aviate Academy, you weren't looking at meeting regulatory minimums and trying to get it a minimum time and minimum cost. You wanted to essentially feed United Airlines with the best pilots you can to assure air safety for the traveling public. And there's a lot to say about that, because that's not the approach that most academies or training centers do. And in fact, a lot of training centers are contracted to do the initial training of the pilots, and then they may or may not end up at an air carrier. So, and I think it's really exciting what you're doing. Now, there's a couple questions here. I have Skip Johnson has a great question. Anybody who doesn't know Skip, he also has his own aviation organization, but he's also an A320, 319 Airbus instructor at United Airlines as well. So, and you kind of just touched on that as well. And what I'm going to do, Danny, I'm going to put this question up, But as I was walking down the hallway with the recording going, as I saw Otter, Captain Clark McNeese in the hallway, and he's the one that oversaw the implementation of UPRT at United Airlines, and it also is overseeing the United Aviate Academy and its UPRT implementation. So I asked him if he would join us. So he's in the waiting room right now. So let's bring this question up and address it, and then I think we'll maybe transition a little bit to focusing on the UPRT Fluency, which is the title of your presentation today. So let me bring up this question by Skip, which I think is very pertinent to the condition we're facing today. So there it is. Let me just read it to you while you have time to think about it there, Danny. It says, so I'll ask the first question when it comes to time. Captain Hall, why don't you discuss the changing new hire demographics, which you alluded to, both from military versus civilian standpoint and overall time experience at our airline, how that presents a risk, especially when it comes to previous UPRT experience, and why, because of law of primacy, is it so important to incorporate UPRT early in the training program? So Skip did a real nice transition, I think, from the higher level discussion of why United Aviate Academy and United Airlines are doing what they're doing, and now I think transitioning to the UPRT Fluency. So Danny, over to you. And as you're doing that, I'm going to bring Captain McNeese.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and I agree. Skip is the man. Thanks for teeing that up for me, Skip. I don't mind the fact that he's a former Thunderbird. We'll talk about that later. But so great question. Great way to start it off. And I think this is really the foundation of why we are so laser focused at United on developing the best training possible. So let's just talk about the facts real quick. Prior to COVID, I already said average pilot at United had 3,500 hours, but when they started at United, that has reduced. And as we go through the challenges in the next 5 to 10 years, I don't see how that number is going to increase. It's going to continue to decline. You look at the demographics, the overall demographics of our pilot group. 20 years ago, over half, in fact, close to 3/4 of our pilot group were prior military or current military. Now that's almost flopped. That's almost 180 to where we are predominantly civilian and a minority, if you will, or a minor group of military. So what that tells me is, first and foremost, let's talk about the flight time experience. I alluded to it earlier, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we got to be able to bridge that gap between the old school way, if you will, or prior to COVID or prior to these challenges of creating training programs or SOPs, recurrent training, or just day-to-day line flying, of being able to rely on a lot of experience from our pilots, right? How do we bridge that gap? How do we bring them back up to where we expect them to be? Because we can't tell our customers, can't tell my bosses that, well, they have less experience, so we're going to need to tone everything down. We're going to need to slow everything down, please. That's not going to work, right? And we need to maintain the highest level of safety possible. So we've got to look at ways to increase the quality of training and the safety of training. And you're seeing that at UAA. We've already talked about that. At United Airlines, you're seeing us continually evaluate our AQP program, continually evaluate our SOPs, everything within the pilot ecosystem, to include basic NDOC, like I alluded to during my presentation. We are constantly tweaking our training program to meet the needs and the demand of our pilots, because, again, if they are safe, then they're going to take care of the company. I also have to applaud the FAA. Right? They came out with the AC. We call it United the professional pilot development, that total pilot concept. I think that's fantastic, right? You got to look at not just the technical aspect of being a pilot. You got to look at the resiliency training. You got to look at the cognitive ability and the cognitive training for our pilots moving forward as well. All of those feed into how we bridge that gap. That experience gap. And then, there's other opportunities that we're going to come up with at United through our Aviate partners, through UAA, that I think will continue to tune up and increase the quality of training. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag right now. I'll get in trouble, which is okay. I get in trouble all the time, but there's some other things coming down the road that I think they're going to increase the quality. And then you also look at that demographic. I'm not saying military or civilian that your experience or your upbringing is better or worse if you went through one. But when it comes to upset prevention and recovery training, the statistics don't lie. The data doesn't lie. Military pilots, we start from the very beginning, right, of going upside down and exploring all envelope, all phases of flight, right? If you look at a civilian pilot training and the way that they are taught and they're through their training, they're kind of, unfortunately, it's not their fault. Again, I'm not throwing any spears, but they are through the civilian training pipeline, they're stovepiped into, a plus or minus 45 degrees and plus or minus on the edge, right? Or 60 degrees maybe, and then plus or minus 20 or 30 degrees. And so how do we, again, bridge that knowledge gap and bridge that experience of all envelope, all phase of training or flight training in the cockpit? And that's through UPRT. And so another applause to the FAA for their proactiveness with UPRT and mandating that in the 121 world. And now we're taking that. We understand the importance through you guys, through our own training, through our own feedback from our pilots. And we're now implementing that at an early stage at UAA to try to meet and exceed our challenges and what we think create the best pilot.
That's great, Danny. And I think one thing I'd like to maybe get Otter involved with is that, Skip did mention the law of primacy. Remember, they have the 7 laws of learning. There's law of primacy, recency, intensity, certainly all that we implement as a flight school here to really support the industry initiative that was started by ICAO that was released in 2014 that was actually led by the FAA. Rob Burke at the FAA led that and had the foresight to integrate international representation from around the world to be able to make sure that that was a harmonized approach to UPRT. And I think that you're seeing that coming in the form of ATP, CTP. You're seeing it in the form of the Part 121, 423 extended envelope training. And so I believe the industry is making a trajectory shift in its awareness and the importance of upset training. Now, Otter, would you mind talking about the importance of law of primacy? Because we have the honor of training students just like United Aviate Academy, where they are truly sponges that can absorb anything. And they don't see it as something different. They just see that's the way they're trained. They now have an all attitude capability that, other than the military, was really unheard of. That's just part of who they are as pilots. Now you compare that, Otter, to somebody who has 20,000 hours and 30 years of flying. We train them as well. Maybe you could, relay that. The challenge of training somebody new. For example, the reason I'm bringing it up is a lot of people think that it's harder to train students than it is experienced pilots. When it comes to the area of upset prevention recovery training, it's a bit of a conundrum, right? It's the exact opposite. So, Otter, do you want to talk to that a little bit, then transition to whatever you want, of course, based on what Danny just talked about?
Yeah, sure. Y'all can hear me okay? First of all, I just think it's great to see you again, Danny. And I love the fact that your talk mentions, of course, getting back to the basics, and you integrated that whole emphasis point along with UPRT, because UPRT has been largely viewed as a luxury item. Obviously something not required, but ICAO back in 2012 with their, Doc 111 basically said, nope, gang, game shifted. UPRT is absolutely basic and foundational to developing, a good skill set and a good aviator. Definitely, we see day in and day out professional pilots coming through our program that are challenged in the basics. Because we'd like to think that just because we've operated safely in that small 10% window that you were talking about in terms of attitude, Danny, a minute ago, that we build, 10, 15, 20,000 hours of skill of safely managing our airplane in that window, that those skills would apply once you get out the window. And that is simply not the case, because the skills needed to recover sometimes in certain upsets are counterintuitive. And those senior pilots, without that law of primacy that have developed those skill sets, are gravely disadvantaged and very difficult to overcome some of the gut instincts and natural instincts that they're going to want to do on the flight controls that are inappropriate and will certainly aggravate the situation. And we see that all the time. And it takes longer to train a seasoned aviator in these core requisite skills compared to the cadets or the students. And the United students are so much fun to fly with because they are sponges. They're open. They trust you. The instructor almost implicitly, whereas the senior guys are like, I wonder what this guy is going to really do, or say, or what can he really teach me in this aerobatic airplane. So the learning starts right off the bat. Hour one with the students compared to some seasoned aviators.
Well, can I piggyback on that just real quick? We see it at United, right? Seasoned pilots don't like change. And so what's really fun to watch is a seasoned pilot or a United pilot walks into UPRT training day one and has the attitude of, what are you going to teach me? I've been upset. I've been performing to standard, all attitude flying for 20, 30, 40 years. And what more can you teach me? What else can I do? I've been doing it perfectly. And then after the brief in the sim, just on day one, they pop out of the sim and they go, that's some of the best training I've ever received. And I had no idea that there was this other envelope, that there were the aerodynamics behind it. Thank you for teaching us the strategy. I mean, they're just blown away. And that speaks volumes to why this training is so important. To go back to the basics, and we need to be able to teach all pilots this type of training.
And you're talking about a program that is UPRT comprehensive. It is not the usual stall and unusual attitudes that we've been doing for decades. No. We're not talking about relabeling what we've already been doing. We're talking about a comprehensive approach to mitigating loss of control in flight that is a paradigm shift. And that's what United did when they partnered with APS to bring that significant shift in training and approach for the pilots.
And we shouldn't be surprised, really, when you, for example, if you're asking a body of pilots that have no experience in an area to teach it, of course they're going to gravitate to what they know and largely teach what they were doing before under a different name. And to Danny's point, that's not at all what a transformational UPRT program is. It essentially gives skill sets and an understanding of aerodynamics where it's not counterintuitive anymore. They now transfer between environments. When you have an all-attitude understanding of how angle of attack and lift vector and energy management work, it transforms to the heart of the envelope as well as it does to the all-attitude environment. Okay, I got a couple more questions up here, guys. And so if you're waiting out there, we have about 12 minutes left. Warren, I'm going to get to yours. Tobias on YouTube, I'm going to try to get to yours. And then Mike Ott, good friend and member of the MBAA Safety Committee, a great question as well. We don't need to dive into any detail on this one, Danny, but I think Warren brings up a great point. And just let me talk a little bit about Warren. Warren is the flight education chair at Florida Tech. He's also part of the MBAA Safety Committee Loss of Control in Flight Working Group. He's leading that as part of the team. And so he has a deep understanding of the challenges faced by the industry as well. And so he's a great guy, and he brings up an important point on standardization. Let me just bring this to the table. We don't need to go into any details, but I think that what he is saying is very true. And it's a perfect transition from what we were talking about teaching what we used to do under a different name. And that's not at all the intent of the industry. So let's go ahead and bring that in. So I'll just read it while you guys can think about it. The United Aviate Academy is just one pathway to get to United Airlines. The Aviate program is partnered with other flight academies and aviation universities nationwide. Standardization across all of these independent entities would be a near impossible task. But what are some first steps United can take with its Aviate partners to ensure quality of syllabi and instructors and emphasize the importance of UPRT? Danny, did you want to jump on that? And I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And Otter, notice how BJ said we don't need to talk details twice. So he just told me to make sure I keep this succinct. I get it. Yeah, copy that.
I have
no, I appreciate, because I love this kind of stuff, especially when you start talking about standardization. And Warren, thanks for that. And I look forward to chatting with you after this. Bottom line is, Warren, you said that standardizing across the Aviate ecosystem is impossible. I'm going to challenge you and say part of my job is to make it not impossible. My goal is actually to try to standardize across the Aviate ecosystem. We're going to start with a few different baby steps, right? It's an elephant. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time kind of thing? And we're going to start with a few minor areas. One of those is UPRT. We're working right now on trying to create that pathway and that standardization effort with all attitude training, UPRT training with all of our different partners. I think, BJ, I don't want to overstep any boundaries, but I'm definitely, BJ and I are talking about it right now. We're trying to figure out how to make that work. Is that a good way to say that?
Yeah.
But the ultimate goal, Warren, again, 30 seconds or less on this one. The ultimate goal for me, for my bosses, and even I got this directly from Scott Kirby, and this is one more data point that United cares ultimately about the safest and most qualified pilot possible. Is we want to create one standardization, one SOP across the Aviate ecosystem for our pilots, so that on day one, they learn United's SOPs, law of primacy kicks in, and when they start at United, they now have their entire career of a foundation to build from and start at United with United SOPs. They don't have to unlearn and relearn and all that kind of stuff. So that's my goal. It's a lofty one. I don't think it's impossible, but Warren, I'll be reaching out to you and asking for some help, I'm sure.
And I would say, the exciting part about that, Danny, is that, in our 25 years, our overnight success of 25 years of figuring out UPRT solutions is that, that's exactly kind of the heart of the envelope, right? Taking a program and implementing it at 2 airlines of more than 10,000 pilots each, and how to do that, creating flight academies that are completely standardized in multiple locations around the world across 3 continents. That's not an easy task to do, but it certainly can be accomplished. And, we have the right person on the call here today, which is Otter, who oversees both airline and flight school and partner facility implementation. Otter, what are your thoughts on implementing a standardization solution that Warren brings up and Danny's alluding to in, say, 30 seconds or less? Is it possible? And what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with him completely. It is absolutely possible. One of the problems right now is many of the industry training leaders are unaware of some of the latest guidance that is out there now from ICAO, the FAA, like advisory circulars and things like that address how to conduct UPRT. So I think the education process, through that, we can help people see that, there is now some harmonization and standardization as we do the UPRT.
And one of the things we find when we talk, and we're having an event coming up on the 22nd of December called the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard, is having regulatory guidance is only one of 6 pieces of the process. The critical one that stands in the way that Danny brought up in his keynote was the fact that it all hinges on the instructor. The instructors have to be qualified. They have to be competent. They have to understand the entire spectrum of training from ab initio to the left seat of the airline, what's required to make sure that it's positive transfer of skill throughout that process to eliminate and avert negative training or negative transfer of skill. So it's not easy by any ways, but it's absolutely possible and has been done. So we're excited about that. Before I go to Tobias, let me go to Mike Ott. And Mike has a great question because it kind of transitions a little bit out of the serious mode and back into what he's talking about is making safety cool. So from Mike, Danny, great phrase, make safety cool. It sounds like the next safety poster. What practical steps have you taken to make safety cool? Do you want to jump on that one, Danny? I think he's referring to either United Aviate and or United Airlines.
Yeah, United Aviate. Well, let's first and foremost say that we start the safety education early on, and we try not to make it boring. We try to make it cool, and we try not to make safety a 4-letter word, and just say, hey, safety is part of our everyday practice. It's part of our ecosystem. We just had a safety stand-down day, actually, down at United Aviate Academy. We spent an entire day literally talking about safety. We had our director of safety talk. We had our vice president of corporate safety, Sasha Johnson, come down and give a phenomenal speech to the students. Same with our managing director of flight safety, Rob Thomas. He came down and gave a speech. And so just throwing safety out there in a positive light, not as a reactive measure, but as a proactive measure from the very beginning. That's how you start safety being cool, but it's a huge cultural change, right? And cultural shifts take forever. And unfortunately, safety is still a 4-letter word in a lot of companies and just some of our psyche, right? Because we have treated safety like it's a reactive, thing where we need to be proactive about it. So let's start by saying safety is cool. Let's start the education process from day one. Sound familiar, by the way? We keep talking about law of primacy and starting all this stuff from day one. Let's start safety and the positive education of safety from day one. And let's integrate it positively. Let's make it a part of our training. Let's make it a part of our briefs, our debriefs, as something that we can learn from. And, again, I'm not here to try to promote the FAA too much. I love our partners with the FAA. However, they did a great job of turning around their culture. So let's do the same thing in our industry.
Otter, anything to add to that?
No, well said. Well said.
I was at the Bombardier Safety Stand Down, which is considered a very cool event, by the way. In fact, one of the leading safety events, and Charlie Precourt won the Bombardier Safety Award this year, who's a former NASA shuttle pilot. And he talked about safety. And the one thing that he mentioned that I thought was pretty powerful is that you used to become the safety officer when you did something wrong.
Right.
You know what I mean? And no longer. Now the safety officer position is not only a prestigious position, but you want the best of the best in that position. Yeah. And so from a cool standpoint, being a unique and really elite position, I believe, within an airline or a flight department or a flight school, I think says a lot about it being not only cool, but critical, right? And the proactive aspect of modern safety management system principles are really at play. Okay, we got about 3 minutes left. We've already kind of addressed Tobias's question, but I want to bring it up since I said I would. And maybe just final comments on this. From Tobias, he's on YouTube joining us today. Integrated ATP students get rushed through airline pilot factory to the point where the rudder is disregarded. How can ATOs focus on back to the basics in the current state of the industry? Now, I think that, not sure what he means by rudder, but the response we give if we dove into that might not be exactly what he would expect. But Otter, did you want to talk maybe a little bit about the back to the basics in concepts like UPRT and how sometimes the basics in ab initio training don't transfer to commercial transport category airplanes?
Yeah, wow. This is a big one. And I don't think I could do it justice by
30 seconds, the best you can do, and then we'll do wrap up, Otter. So I know it's a huge topic. What do you think?
Well,
take a minute. Go ahead.
All I'll say is the use of the rudder, when to use the rudder, all is a critical topic in UPRT. It's got to be addressed. There's still so much bad information, so many bad demonstrations out there on YouTube. I'm watching, senior instructors teaching to use the rudder to roll in these Cessnas during stall recoveries, things like that. So, in any case, I don't know if I touched on what he was talking about, but there does need to be a standardization as it relates to the rudder.
And I would just simply add that you can take an airplane like an ab initio airplane, like, for example, we use Extra 300s. We use Grobes in the military locations, Slings we use over in Europe. We use jet airplanes here, S211s, all attitude airplanes. And you can take those platforms and teach very transferable concepts, techniques, and methods that transfer across fixed wing aviation, or you can take them and teach catastrophic technique that can destroy airplanes if done inappropriately. And there's been, that's happened. American 587 is a great example of the incorrect use of rudder that was the causal to that fatal accident, simply because a military technique and or ab initio flying technique was tried to transfer it into transport category airplanes. So that's really what it comes down to. The instructor needs to be aware of that. They need to be fluent in that language. And one of their biggest roles is identifying the benefits and limitations of the various training platforms, from academic to on-aircraft to piston to jet to simulation to VR. The instructor is really critical in that process. Okay, guys, we're in our last minute. Let's go. Otter, final thoughts, and we're going to let Danny wrap it up here with his final words of wisdom. Otter, anything to add today?
No, nothing. It's great to see Danny again and being a new dad there as well. Are you getting any sleep?
No, not at all. But
okay.
No.
Okay.
So this is Danny performing with an IQ of 75, not his normal 150, right, day to day. So thank you, Danny, for being here. Any final thoughts and words of wisdom for everybody today?
No, the tiredness probably cut down on my diatribe, so that's good. But you guys saw me drinking water to try to stay hydrated, stay awake. But no, thank you for your time. Thanks for everybody that joined us today in the Q&A. I look forward to further connections on LinkedIn. And just, I really appreciate what you all are doing. Otter, it's great to see you, my friend. BJ, thank you. Look forward to seeing you guys in Phoenix soon.
Great. Thank you, Danny. Thank you for everybody being here today. And the exciting part is this is available on demand to watch. And for example, our UPRT Safety Summit has had over 4,000 unique views already in just a couple of weeks. And so it's really exciting to have these kind of resources out of the industry. And it comes because of the opportunities we have with people to speak to people like you, Danny. So thank you for making your time available today. So with that, everybody, take care. We will see you next time, and we will see you, Danny and Otter. I'll see you in a minute for annual planning here, okay? Here we go, guys.